Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Welcome very much, General Powell. It's good to see you. I want to ask you about these transcripts, because when you read these transcripts, this was a man who was polite throughout, calling the officers sir, he was apologizing. It's really, to my reading and to all of that we saw in the video, a horrifying example of what happens to black men in America.
It is a horrifying example, and we see too much of it. But at the same time, we have come a long way. When I entered the Army 62 years ago, it was still a segregated country, although the Army had been integrated. And we have come a long way that allowed me to rise to the top of my profession, but it isn't over yet. Racism still exists. We still have people who want to take it out on people who are people of color. And we have to make sure that our top leadership, especially the President of the United States, has to be an example to the rest of the country that we are one nation, one people, and make sure that we can make these systems go away, these systems of racism and the kind of intolerance that still exists in our country. It has to be fought, it has to be broken, and I think we can do it. But it also means that we have to, with our African American and other minority communities, make sure that they have a chance to be successful in life in this great country of ours, by making sure they have jobs, that they have education, they have what is needed, which is what I got that allowed me to be successful in the United States Army. So we've got a long way to go. We've come a long way, but it is not over. And what we have to do is all of our political leaders to speak out against this kind of treatment to our fellow citizens. They are fellow citizens. I love them as much as I love anyone else. But it isn't good to have this kind of racism exist, nor is it good to have the violence that we see in our society, the gun violence that we see almost in every major city in America. We've got a lot of work to do.
There's also new information coming out that NBC News has uncovered in the Breonna Taylor case, where the chief investigator with those officers back in that case is heard saying that a battering ram was the most passive way that they could enter her house. Previously unheard audio from those interviews. This tells us that it is really as systemic as many people had feared in terms of the way these cases are investigated by police departments.
Because it's tolerated, because there is no discipline within the system that says you cannot do that and you cannot be a police officer if you feel this is the way to handle your fellow citizens. And so we need that kind of political pressure and that kind of police force in every one of our cities that will go after this kind of behavior. It can be done. But we also have racism. We have people who tolerate this, people who encourage this, and that has to be wiped out. And it has to start with the White House of the United States of America, where we start talking in a manner that makes it clear that this kind of behavior is unacceptable and can no longer be tolerated in this country of ours.
The president has called Black Lives Matter a symbol of hate. How do you see that messaging coming from the president?
Well, it's typical of him, but it is no such thing. It is not a matter of hate. Black lives matter. It's a matter of fact. But he doesn't accept it. He always sees it in terms of other dimensions, and that's wrong. And so he should be reaching out to the African American community and the Latino community and other communities that are falling behind in the success that our country enjoys. And he should be leading this, not criticizing it. But I see in the 4 years that he has been president, he's always found an opportunity to criticize this kind of behavior, this kind of organization. We've seen it in almost every one of these terrible incidents where he sort of thinks that he can take sides, that they both were okay. No, they were not both okay. The ones who were not okay were those who were responsible for the racism or the violence that took place against their fellow citizens. And that's what we need. And we're going to get that with Joe Biden. I've known him for many, many years. That's the kind of guy he is. We can be sure that when Joe becomes president of the United States of America, he will be in the lead of taking on this kind of crisis and bringing more sanity to our thinking here in our country.
On July 4th, in his speech, the president actually gave a shout out to the Confederacy, and he compared the people who fought for the Confederacy as fighting for freedom, comparing them to the Marines at Iwo Jima. When he speaks so fondly of the Confederacy and talks about not changing the names of Confederate soldiers, the bases named after Confederate generals and all the rest, do you think that makes him a racist?
I don't like to use that word. Let me just say that he is intolerant. He doesn't understand our history. He doesn't understand our history at all. These folks that he's talking about, they're no longer in the American country. They are in the Confederate States of America. Robert E. Lee was a great tactician, but he was a leader of the Confederate Army, which succeeded in starting a war that killed 600,000 Americans. And so it is one thing to treat him as a tactical hero and put him off in a corner somewhere, but it's not the right place to give him the kind of presence that he has in our society through statues or other discussions. They were not great Americans. They were great members, perhaps, tactically, of the Confederate States of America, but they were no longer Americans at that point.
I wanted to ask you about your own personal experiences. You were the proud son of immigrants. You were raised in the Bronx in New York City. And then in 1957 and 1958, you drove to basic training in Fort Benning, Georgia. Tell me about your experiences and what you experienced in the Jim Crow South. It was before the Civil Rights Act.
In those days, if you wanted to go from, say, New York City to Columbus, Georgia, there's only one motel that you could stop at along the way that would accept black people. And there was another one on the western approach to New York City from that part of the country. That's the way it was. It was segregation. You better have some folks you could stay with or a lot of chicken in the car to keep you fed. But once you got to Fort Benning, you were in an integrated society, and all they cared about was, am I a good soldier? Am I going to be a good soldier? But I'll never forget coming home from my first tour in Vietnam, where I had been injured in a booby trap. I went to Birmingham to pick up my wife and bring her to Columbus, Georgia. In Birmingham in those days, 1963, my father-in-law was guarding my wife while I was in Vietnam from Bo Connor and the rest of the characters in Birmingham. But I was going back to Fort Benning from Birmingham, and I stopped at a hot dog place in Columbus, Georgia, on the way back to Fort Benning. And I asked for, just give me a hot dog or a hamburger. And the young woman said, no, I can't. I don't know why. I'm from New Jersey. I don't understand this, but I can't serve you. You want to go around the back and pick it up? No, I don't want to go around the back and pick it up. And so I went back to Fort Benning, and I was treated as a normal American citizen. And then that was in early 1964. And on July 3rd, 1964, or 4th, I don't remember exactly the date, but it was when the Accommodations Act was signed by the President Lyndon Johnson. And then I went back to that place and ordered my meal, and I got it. I was served. The reality here was that segregation and that kind of discrimination was as much a burden on white people as it was on black people. And that's why we have to keep fighting it. Because for America to be America, the kind of America I love, the kind of America I have served for most of my adult life, we have to make sure that we're opening up that America and the opportunities that exist in America to every person who says they're an American or an immigrant for that matter. I'm a son of immigrants. My parents came here on banana boats from Jamaica, and all they said to me was, do your very, very best, and always make sure that you love this country of ours now that we are members of this country of ours.
General Powell, how do you feel about renaming the military bases? The president is opposed. The military has been reviewing it, and apparently Fort Benning, where you served, it was one that they were preparing to rename.
You know, it's interesting because in those early years when I spent a lot of time at Benning, which we call Benning School for Boys in those days, it never occurred to me that this was such a problem. But it is a problem, and it's been identified now by the military. The leaders of the United States military want to look at those names because they mean something now that they didn't mean all those years before. So I think it is quite appropriate that the 10 bases, Army bases anyway, that we have in the southern part of the United States should be looked at by the leadership of the military, and the president should keep out of it and let the military figure out what the right thing is to do. But he won't. He says, no, you can't do that. Why can't they do it? I think they ought to be allowed to do it. I think it is their responsibility, and I hope they don't stop now. But you see, that's the problem we have. We have a president who goes out of his way to keep us from moving forward. But we're moving forward without his blessing, because the people of the United States of America know what is right, and we're slowly getting to that point. And those who don't know, those who remain racist, those who keep fighting, those who will conduct violent acts on people of color and immigrants, they're the ones that we have to deal with. Push them aside, let them know this is not America. This is not the America we love. And this is not the America that we're going to be in the future. So get your education, get a job, and start being a part of our society just as everyone else is. So we've got a lot of work to do, but it's work that can be done if we have leadership at every single level. And it's going to be Joe Biden that gives us that leadership.
Well, let me ask you about the Confederate flag, because the president was defending the Confederate flag and attacking Bubba Wallace on NASCAR.
I know. I don't know why he does this. Doesn't he have more important things to do? I mean, why is he fooling around with NASCAR and a flag? And if Mississippi wants to change its flag, it's no business of the president. It's called states' rights. It's their flag, not his flag. He should worry about the American flag, and we should devote all this time to the American flag and stop sitting around tweeting people all the time. Get going. Let's go. Come on, Mr. President. You got a few more months to go.
What do you think about the Washington football team and changing its name?
That's a tricky one. I think a name should be changed. I think time for Mr. Snyder to realize that it is out of date, and that the citizens of Washington and the citizens of the United States, for that team and other teams in America that have this kind of connotation, let's get a better name for them. People think, well, that's terrible. No, it's not terrible. It'll happen. And a year from now, no one will remember what that name was. So let's feel free to move and to make changes and to face the reality of the future, not the troubles of the past.
I want to ask you about the pandemic. The president, first of all, has been blaming China, but there was a lot of intelligence that he didn't seem to be following in January and February about the pandemic. And now he's ordering governors to reopen schools when a lot of parents, teachers, and other people who go to or who work in the schools are worried about their own safety. It's a tough issue. Where do you stand on that?
We have 13,000 different school districts in the United States. A few of them belong to the government, the military, but most of them are privately run. They belong to those communities. It's not his place to come along and say, you got to do it my way. And then he confuses everything by saying that, well, I'm going to have the CDC change its rules. But the CDC did not change its guidelines or rules. And so there's confusion. And it all happened without any real planning. And so I think what we're going to see is that individual communities that have their own school board will decide what they're going to do with that school system. And they're not waiting for instructions from the White House or from governors who have been ordered by the White House to do something different. The president doesn't have any authority over these various school districts, and he should stop pretending that he does.
What about the president and the military? We saw what happened on June 1st when one of your successors as Joint Chiefs Chairman walked through Lafayette Square. The military was invoked, at least the president said he was going to use the Insurrection Act. What about that standard? I know that General Milley apologized for that later. Would you have made that walk?
No. You have to be very, very careful as an active duty officer to have a view on everything, but when it comes to public activity, make sure that you're not participating in what is considered a political issue. Now, I've had political positions and I've also had military positions, but in my time as a soldier, the 35 and a half years I was a soldier, I avoided politics like the plague. It was not my business. It was the business of the civilians I worked for. And so in this case, General Milley felt that he was being used, and he kind of was. He just kind of got sucked up in this group of people that were marching to the church. And he wrote a very moving, impressive letter explaining his situation and frankly asking for the apology of his fellow citizens.
There was an analogous time back when George Bush 41 was president and the Rodney King riots were taking place, and you advised the President of the United States, you were Joint Chiefs Chairman, not to bring the military in, to try to use the National Guard first.
Yes, that was pretty standard, straightforward stuff. It was up to the National Guard to be the first force going in addition to the police force. and President Bush and I were discussing it, and then the whole thing got out of control, and the whole streets are being burned. And it was at that point that President Bush consulted with the leadership in California and decided that it needed the federal forces to go in, and that I was called by President Bush that night and told to alert federal forces, and we did. Both Marines and Army forces were alerted, and we went in and put that down and then got out as fast as we could. Sometimes it's necessary to use federal forces that go beyond, police forces or National Guard. It's not the first time it's happened. We had to use that to integrate our schools in the South, you may remember. And that was the 82nd Airborne, 101st Airborne, had to go in and do that. All legal, all constitutional.
I want to ask you also about Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, who decided to retire yesterday rather than face the controversy affecting all of his fellow soldiers. But it was clearly recommended by the Defense Secretary that he be put on the list. The president had to sign off on it, and the signal was the president was not going to agree to that promotion in retaliation for his impeachment testimony.
I don't know what the president was going to do. There were reports that the White House was trying to get the Pentagon to find something wrong with the colonel so they could use that to keep him from being promoted. But I know for a fact that the Secretary of Defense had signed off on this last Thursday night, I think it was, saying that he should be on that list and he is deserving of promotion. A board of officers had looked at him, examined him carefully, and put him on that promotion list. He then decided that it isn't going to work out because he's just going to catch the devil from the White House or from others in government. And so it was his decision to leave the military. But he had been covered by the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of the Army and others in the military that he should be promoted. He was selected for promotion, and he was in line for promotion until he decided that it wasn't going to work out. He felt anyway, that he was going to get bullied by the president and others. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. It's what he felt. And that was the reports you saw in the papers.
Senator Tammy Duckworth.
In other words, because he testified in the Ukrainian trials, he felt like that there would be such of a strong conflict of interest that he would still be badgered or ridiculed over his stance of him believing that he was doing the right thing, even though it was standing up against his chief and commander, Donald J. Trump. And because of the conflict of interest that was going to be so conflicting, he decided that it would be best just to walk away and take an early retirement, the way that I'm understanding everything about that. She's going down the row here towards asking several different subjects about several different things that are in fact related around Donald J. Trump.
Vilified by the president in retweeting attacks that have come from Fox News, not calling her a moron, saying she's not a patriot. This is a soldier who lost both legs fighting for our country in Iraq. What message does that send to senators in both parties for going up against the president and for respect for the military?
All of them should stand up and reject such a discussion. If I had one piece of advice for the president, which I would hope he would accept, but he wouldn't, stop tweeting. Because you're either blessing yourself and criticizing, cursing out someone else. Let's get back on track, Mr. President, please. You only had another few months to go. But let's try to keep on track and not just go out of our way to insult Americans like you're going to insult me tomorrow morning with a tweet.
Probably.
Let me ask you about the Russia issue and Vladimir Putin also. You were Deputy National Security Advisor. You've been involved in the President's daily briefs. No matter what the intelligence was, a thread of intelligence about Russia's ongoing arming of the Taliban, which has been going on for some time, according to NBC's reporting now, citing 3 on the record military commanders from Afghanistan. How do you justify the president embracing Vladimir Putin, inviting him back to the G7, not being briefed about some of this, verbally briefed about some of these Russian activities?
I don't know what he knew or didn't know. Don't have access to that kind of intelligence. But what I know is that our military commanders on the ground did not think that it was as serious a problem as the newspapers were reporting and television was reporting. It got kind of out of control before we really had an understanding of what had happened. I'm not sure we fully understand now. But General McKenzie, who is the sink, as I call him in the military, he was commander-in-chief. He has indicated that he did not think that this was of that level of importance to us. Remember, it's not the intelligence community that's going to go fight these guys. It's the guys on the ground. It's our troops. It's our commanders who are going to go deal with this kind of a threat using intelligence that was given to them by the intelligence community. But that has to be analyzed. It has to be adjusted. And then you have to go find out who the enemy is. And I think we were on top of that one, but it got almost hysterical in the first few days.
But in any case, according to our reporting, General McKenzie and others have affirmed that the Taliban have been armed for years now by Russia. Doesn't that require a tougher stance against Vladimir Putin from the president?
I would think so, but the president has a unique relationship with Vladimir Putin. He even wanted them to come to the G7 meeting and make it a G8 meeting. And so that's the president's personal point of view with respect to Mr. Putin. But at the same time, I follow what's going on in my beloved army, and we're busy building up forces in Europe as if we were going to get in a war with the Russians. We're not going to get in a war with the Russians. We have 334 million Americans. The Russians have 134 million Russians. They're not competent. They're not qualified to attack us and trigger the NATO response. And so I don't think we're in a position to go to war with the Russians. And I know Mr. Putin rather well. He's just figured out a way to stay in power until the year 2036. The last thing he's looking for is a war. And the last thing he's looking for is a war with the United States of America or a war with NATO. So I think there are ways to handle this, but we seem to have lost the ability to do diplomatic work very successfully. And so here we have the president inviting him to come to the G7 and make it a G8. At the same time, Americans are building up forces in Europe in case the Russians do attack. We have lost a lot of our diplomatic effort. I see a lot of things that don't make sense to me. Why are we doing some of the things we are doing? Why did we pull out of the INF treaty? A treaty that I negotiated with Secretary of State George Shultz that reduced the number of nuclear weapons. And we pulled out of it because we said the Russians were cheating. I said, well, keep talking to the Russians, figure out what we can do to get them out of this. And we said, no, we'll just pull out of the treaty. But once we're out of the treaty, the Russians were no longer cheating. We've got to be more careful in the way we have to look at things like the World Health Organization. In the middle of a pandemic, we are quitting the World Health Organization because of something that happened months ago.
I've always valued this man's opinions and his experiences. And Mr. Powell, as far as I'm concerned, should have run for president during the time that young Bush became president after Bill Clinton. After 9/11, Mr. Powell didn't stay strong with the approach that the Bushes had gotten the Americans into so much trouble by going to war with the Iraqi people, claiming that they was trying to bring stability to that particular area. And instead of them bringing stability to that area, they actually made it worse whenever they took Saddam Hussein out. That created a vacuum. Because Mr. Powell had spoken up against that administration's desires, they basically put him on the back burner, and he kind of disappeared from the limelight as far as not having a great influence in the eyes of our political affairs. And I feel like that Mr. Powell got the wrong end of the deal in that regard, because he was against the Iraqi war, just like President Ford was against the Iraqi war. The only difference was Mr. Powell went ahead and spoke up about his indifferences, and Mr. Ford said that he didn't want his disclosed until after he was dead and after they buried him, and that's whenever the world become known of saying that Mr. Ford himself was against the Iraqi war, because we was going to war with the wrong people. And inevitably, we spent about $6 or $7 trillion, and God only knows that the lives that we lost, the eyes, the arms, the legs, the foot, the feet, the legs that we lost, the psychological damage that we went through over going to war with the wrong people. So yes, Mr. Powell and Mr. Ford and others that spoke up against that was correct. They was very correct, because there was no mass war, bombs of mass destruction as far as a nuclear bomb or etc., with Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was dealing with his people with an iron fist. And the reason why that he was using an iron fist, because those people's tactics over there are different than our tactics. Now, some of the things that he done, I disagreed with, especially whenever it come to killing his own cousins and brothers, and basically he was just a ruthless human being. But at the same time, I was smart enough to identify that it took something like that to be able to control that type of group of people. After they took Saddam Hussein out and they hung him like a wretched rat, that's whenever things exploded over in the Middle East, and that's whenever the Taliban and the Jihad and about 56 other different groups just absolutely went crazy, wildly crazy, to the point that today there still is civil unrest over in that area. Once more, instead of us getting the bang for the buck towards bringing stability into that region, we actually made it worse. We made it worse because of all the thugs and all the tyrants that are now controlling their people in a wicked, wicked way. Same way over in Iran. A wicked, wicked way. That's been a mess for years and years and years. And Mr. Powell and Mr. Ford knowed that what the Bushes was doing was only agitating, bringing insult to misery in regards to all that. And of course, that's helped us become $25 trillion in debt to where we are right now. I admired Mr. Powell. I really did, because he was I think he was a 5-star general, and he was right up underneath all the big guys in the Pentagon, and he knew exactly what was going on. And once more, the true truth has yet to be told about the Saudi government that masterminded 9/11, that killed over 3,000 people, because we are so tightly bonded with them, with the oil industry pertaining to greed and money. OPEC, it has put the American people in between a hard place and a rock in prejudging true judgment that should have been condemned upon the Saudi government. And I'm not even talking about the execution of an individual, a writer or a reporter that was killed, and we know that he was killed illegitimately in that parliament. But I'm just talking about 9/11 period. Who masterminded 9/11? They put the blame all on bin Laden, and they tried to act like that it was bin Laden that had done all of that. But yet now, the day of 9/11, the Saudi princess and the Saudi officials was here in America to watch it actually unfold. And it was the day after that our president, even though aviation had been grounded, it was the day after whenever they was given permission of flying from the United States back home. So yeah, as far as I'm concerned, it was an inside job, and the Bushes knew it. Probably to some extent, maybe even Colin Powell knew it, but because there are certain things that's considered taboo that you just don't talk about in upper layers of government, it never did clearly come out in that defiant way.
And it was not all that consequential compared to what we have done. It doesn't make sense. We're losing some of our tools. Peace Corps, Radio Free Europe, Voice of America, AID, all these efforts that we had that made us one of the most beloved countries on earth, because we reached out to others to help them with aid, to help them with communications, to give them assistance, and to let them know America is the leading democracy in the world. We're here to keep peace. We're here to help build up other democracies. The democracy we built in Germany, the democracy we built in Japan after World War II. We were the champions of the world. And we're losing that champion slot because of the things we've been doing diplomatically that are not successful, and essentially are giving the world a bad image of us. And you can see it everywhere you go in the world today, that we are not the same beloved United States of America that we used to be.
With General Colin Powell.
And that's scary. As harsh and as cruel and as callous as that may sound, that's scary. But it is, in fact, the truth. That is where the rubber meets the road pertaining to how other people view us just within the past 25 or 30 years.
A former Secretary of State, former Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. I know you don't do very many interviews. It's been a great privilege today. Thank you very much for joining us right now, right here on MSNBC.
Thank you, Andrea.
And that does it for this edition of Andrea Mitchell Reports. Chuck Todd and Katie Tur pick up our coverage after a break.
Supreme Court has ruled that President Trump does not have complete immunity from grand jury subpoena. But the court also gave the president a great deal of leeway with the congressional subpoena.
I don't hear nothing about that.
He's declared that he is not above the law. I hear he's tweeting one thing and then the other people are saying another. But whatever it is, it's not good news for the President of the United States.
Right now, ousted U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Berman is testifying to the House Judiciary Committee behind closed doors. Berman, of course, was fired by President Trump last month following a clash with Attorney General Barr over federal oversight. And in the state of Florida, the new epicenter of the coronavirus crisis, officials reported nearly 9,000 additional new cases today. The positivity rates for tests over the past week is almost a shocking 20%. Joining me, of course, is my co-anchor for the next 2 hours, Katie Tur. Katie, I enjoyed a little bit of a break, but I missed our time together. What are we watching with the presidential race right now?
That's Katie, the cleaning lady.
I certainly missed you, Chuck. We are following something of a split-screen moment in the battleground state of Pennsylvania. Vice President Pence will campaign in Malvern next hour before addressing Philadelphia police this evening. His speech coming, of course, during a national conversation over police reform. Also next hour, Joe Biden will unveil his much-anticipated economic recovery plan to metal workers in Dunmore, Pennsylvania. Biden is expected to focus on American manufacturing and infrastructure spending, as well as a plan to address the fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic, which continues to devastate communities across the country. We should also note the rolling 7-day average for coronavirus deaths has now risen for a second day in a row. That is the first time that has happened, Chuck, since June 2nd, which was more than 5 weeks ago.
Yeah, the scientists continue to be right in everything they have projected. They just may not have the exact dates and times for these curves, and if we do this, then this happens. But I think science, once again, is proving that it's science for a reason. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says it is issuing additional information for reopening schools, clarifying, though, it is not new guidance. This follows attacks from President Trump on the agency's guidelines. The White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany claims the president and the CDC are in sync, and that even though the president has not attended a coronavirus task force meeting since April, he is briefed daily on their findings. Meanwhile, the Tulsa County Health Department director says that the president's rally last month and the accompanying protests with it likely contributed to a dramatic surge in coronavirus infections. That, of course, has drawn the attention of folks in New Hampshire, where the president's going to be holding a rally on Saturday. Joining us now is NBC News correspondent Carol Lee. She is live from the White House. Carol, there's a lot of things that, once again, that the president is reacting to, but let's stay focused here on the virus, or the lack of the president's focus on the virus. I mean, it does seem as if he continues to want to be in a place that possibly we were in April and May, rather than where the reality is today.
Yeah, you just hit the nail on the head, Chuck. That's the president has consistently, since the pandemic started, wanted to be ahead in a better place than where, as you said, the reality is on the ground. And that has caused some real tensions between him and members of his coronavirus task force, largely because what they keep experiencing is what we're seeing now with these school opening guidelines, is that they have recommendations, and then the president and the White House come in with a heavy hand and try to redirect or recast these guidelines or recommendations to fit what the president wants, which is, we heard from the president, from the education secretary, schools to fully reopen in the fall. And there's real questions about, from members of the coronavirus task force, whether that's something that they should be pushing so hard on, given the surge in cases. And we heard from Dr. Fauci a number of times, and including in an interview recently, where he said that part of the problem is they pushed, some states moved too fast and didn't follow the guidelines because they were trying to reopen too quickly. And so we saw the president really push states to reopen. He had problems with the way that they were handling businesses reopening. We saw this with churches, and now we're seeing with the schools, and it's the same tension that's been there really from the start.
Carol, has there been any proposal from the White House? I understand they want to get schools to reopen. They're concerned about it, connected with the economy. The best way to do that is to give schools